Beware of chicken. Author, Casualfarmer. Jin Rou wanted to be a cultivator who defied the heavens and surpassed all limits. Unfortunately for him, he died, and now I'm stuck here. Arrogant young masters. Heavenly tribulations. Cultivating for days on end, then getting into life or death battles. Yeah, no thanks. I'm getting out of here. In which a transmigrator decides that the only winning move is not to play. Beware of chicken. In which a transmigrator decides the only winning move is to get the hell out of Dodge. Lu Ai stared at the disciple. The boy had his arm in a sling, a black eye, and several other wounds marring his body. A quite pitiful sight, all told. You wish to leave the sect? He asked, repeating the disciple's request. Yes, senior brother, the disciple said. This Jin Rou's abilities are lacking, and I was defeated by others 2 years my younger. I would leave before I bring greater shame upon this cloudy sword sect. Lu Ai nearly sighed. In all honesty, him being crushed by one of the inner disciples looking for someone to practice with was a foregone conclusion, even with the age difference. The elder disciple considered the brown-haired boy. Indeed, Jin Rou was not powerful, but he was diligent and always willing to tend to the less desirable tasks around the sect. Losing him for his attention to detail in caring for the compound and lowly spirit hobes would be a minor blow, but it was hardly anything that the sect would notice losing. The boy had no real training or techniques of the sect yet either. And if this was enough to crash his spirit and ask to leave, then he was not meant to be a cultivator in the first place. This was no place for the weak of heart. At least he was polite enough to formally go through with his leaving instead of just disappearing. He was the first in over 300 years to use such courtesies and had even provided the sum that was his recompense to the sect for taking him in, as outlined in the proper documents. Lu Ai considered attempting to dissuade him from leaving, but he felt no tumult in the boy's paltry che. His conviction was set. What is your intent after leaving this place, disciple? He asked out of idle curiosity. I shall become a farmer, senior brother, the boy replied. I had some luck in growing the lowly spiritual herbs, so such a thing should be within my minor talents. Lu Ai once more nearly spoke against it, at hearing this madness. A mere farmer, from a boy who, though barely, passed the first of their sect's initiation. The devastating defeat must have completely demoralized him. Unfortunate. This time he did sigh. I see. I shall mark down your leaving. You are no longer a disciple of our sect, Jin Rou. Jin Rou bowed his head and clasped his fist in front of him. This Jin Rou thanks you for your time and consideration. I shall darken the compound's halls no longer. Lu Ai stood and inclined his head. Then go into the world, Jin Rou. And here. He held the pouch containing the severance money back out to him. I shall mark it down as paid in full. Diligence and proper courtesy deserve some reward, and the sect does not need such a paltry sum. It was probably all the money the boy had, anyway. He did of some kindness to him, and Jin Rou would need the luck of heaven in the future. Jin Rou looked shocked, but again bowed his head in supplication. May heaven be kind to you, Lu Ai. And then Jin Rou was gone from the sect. His leaving went unnoticed. // I came to in the middle of dear old Jinny boy getting his beat by a stereotypical young master type. Let me tell you, that was horseshit. Jin was kind of an idiot for not getting out of the way in time when the little shit wanted to fuck somebody up, but at least there was no meridian destroying because the commoner was so beneath him. A few of the other disciples were kind enough to drag my twitching body back to my little room and then ransacked some of the herbs as payment. Dicks. It only really hit me that I was in magical China land while I was moaning in pain. Apparently one of the body shots had hit poor Jin hard enough and in just the right way to stop his heart and kill him. And before he even fell over, I got shoved in. At least I got his memories and how to actually use the remainder of this current batch of herbs to deal with the worst of the damage. Which is some mashing and grinding, which is extremely painful with how many injuries I've got. Jin himself was fairly respectable, I suppose. He was an orphan after his gramps disappeared, who managed to join a sect through hard work, kind of. His admittance was because one of the instructors flipped a coin when deciding his fate, because he just barely squeaked past. Said something about heaven favoring him or some shit. Jin was full of wanting to become a powerful cultivator, a master among masters, and do whatever it is the dickbags who run this place do, which is presumably to be dicks, dickishly. I kinda didn't care about his motivations. My body now, buddy. Sorry, not sorry. Dear old Jin was essentially a servant right now anyway, and had to do every task that the other people offloaded onto him, while harboring vengeance and hate and angst. And let me tell you, I wanted none of that shit. I declare any revenge fantasies and ambitions null and void. I wanted none of the little fuckboy who wasted my ass. And most importantly, I wanted nothing to do with the politics of this world, because holy shit. Lots of line extinguishing and murdering each other for face. You know, standard Shinsha stuff. So I looked up the methods to leaving the sect when I was mobile the next day, grabbed one of Jin's pouches of money, and went to the guy in charge of this kind of stuff. I wasn't expecting to get the money pouch back, but I was fine with losing that one. Jin was actually fairly good at saving. He had been saving to purchase a few spiritual pills after picking up so many extra chores. But what was his is now mine. And I'm getting the fuck out of here and far away from all the sword formations and grand demonic dick punches or whatever the fuck these Chiuni bastards spout. So I started traveling to the Azure Hills, which was regarded as the weakest and the fourth safest place on the continent. Hopefully anyways. Cultivators usually cleared out of weak places pretty quick. I smiled down at my new plot of land. It was a few rolling hills covered by a forest and had a lovely little river winding through it. It was fantastically picturesque, as were most places in the Red Phoenix continent. The land was considered largely useless by the magistrate of the town, as there were some minor monsters around and it needed lots of clearing, but hopefully nothing I couldn't handle. It was also extremely cheap. I had got this place for a steal. Man, fuck property prices back home, this is where it's at. I had considered the possibility I had been fucked over and asked the locals about this place, but nope. No sleeping big bad dudes, as far as anyone knew. Just out of the way and more trouble than it was worth. People rarely came down this way too, as far as it was from the town and the surrounding villages. Nobody to bother me here. Just peace. I breathed in the fantastically clean and invigorating air and shook my head. Enough lazing around. I reached into my wagon and grabbed my axe, causing my chickens to cluck irritatedly at me and the young rooster to crow at the sudden jostling. I gave him a little scratch under his developing wattles and he calmed. Well, time to get to work. Operation No Cultivator bullshit is go. There's a certain sort of zen you reach when you engage in heavy physical activity for long enough. My axe hewed through trees, my saw made planks, my hammer drove in nails, and my plane made things level, fueled by the supernatural strength of Cultivator, even if I was an exceptionally weak one. It was calming and invigorating at the same time, and I must confess I heartily enjoyed the heavy physical labor and the strength of 10 men. My breathing was a perfect rhythm, and my chi circulated around me. I felt so invigorated and refreshed. That, and being able to tear a stump out of the ground with nothing but brute strength would never get old. My first home was a simple, one-room affair, built within the first 3 days. It wasn't anything spectacular, but it would keep the elements off me and the bugs at bay with its thatch roof and pounded dirt floor. It was right against my chicken coop, so I could hear if there were any predatory interlopers during the night, but the foxes and the wolves had yet to notice my intrusion and the prey animals that I had. I was proud of what I had built. I woke with the call of my rooster, who I had named Big Day. An incredibly childish name, I confess, but it amused me greatly. My young lad would follow me around during the day, hopping around and often sitting on my shoulder and proclaiming his dominance to the world, the cheeky shit. Cock-a-doodle-doo. He'd screech. You tell Big Day. I'd reply. My hope at the earth and never dulled, reinforced as it was by my chi, tearing into it with more speed than any ox could generate. My chickens eagerly followed behind me, pecking the bugs and plants I unearthed with my efforts, bucking and plucking all the way. Yes, get good and fat, my pretties, and you will be delectable in the future. Ah, my mouth is watering just thinking about it. Up and down went the hoe, up and down went the hoe, until I noticed something. A strange root poked out and had a faint sense of chi about it. Interested, I picked up the limpy and slightly nondescript root. In Shinchia novels, this is where the protagonist would immediately identify the plant, spouting that it was some rare so-and-so root of 6 elixirs or something, but quite frankly, I had no fucking clue what it was. I'd have to go to the town archive at some point, but considering it was here, it probably wasn't very rare or important. Shrugging, I put it into my house and got back to work. After this field, which was going to be my vegetable garden, I'd start on the rice paddy. It sucks that I haven't been able to get any wheat yet, but what you gonna do? // That night, I had an absolutely delicious egg fried rice with Big D sitting on my shoulder. Maybe it was a little morbid to eat eggs right near your pet chicken, but he didn't seem to mind. Eggs from my chickens, rice from my reserves, some sesame oil that I had splurged on when I bought my land, and some of the leftover lolly spiritual hogs I had liberated from the cloudy whatever sect. They tasted pretty damn good. A little spicy, a little sweet, a little savory. I'd definitely have to grow more of them. They weren't that hard to grow from Jin's memories. I'd just have to baby them for a bit. Sure, I could convert them into pills, but I was extremely suspect about all the pills these people chucked back. I'm half convinced the reason every cultivator is so damn nuts is because of all drugs they did. I shook myself out of my introspection and tuned to the pleased clucking sounds coming from my kitchen. Big D was eagerly pecking at the little nuds of spirit herb I had cut off that looked a bit wilted. They probably wouldn't kill him. Never heard of something dying from eating these things before. If he likes M, he likes N. Not going to deny the little man his food. Soon enough, I got into my bed, with Big D jumping up onto the perch I made him by the window. Man, if I was still in the sect, I'd be doing shitty chores, or sitting in a corner cultivating for months on end, instead of actually making stuff. I went to sleep happy and content with my life choices. Chapter 2, Rice Farming 101. I jolted awake to Big D's furious battle cry and the angry squalling of a fox. I had a shovel in my hand and was out the door as fast as I could into the extremely pleasant night. Big D was flapping around the fox's head, kicking at it furiously. He was too young for his spurs to deal any damage, but he was trying his little heart out. I was transfixed for a moment as David challenged Goliath. Until the fox managed to hit him with its paw and knocked him down and away. His footing was fouled. His fate was sealed. The fox pounced, its razor-sharp teeth going for the kill, to end my little warrior. Oh? You dare trespass into this daddy's domain? I can't believe I just thought that. I snort to myself. The fox's teeth clamped down on iron instead of flesh, and it looked up, shocked at the intervention. It was then the fox realized it fucked up. My shovel whirled, and with a clang, the fox died. I looked to my little warrior. He had managed to get to his feet and was glaring as hatefully as he could at the fox's corpse. I gave him a once-over, and he was fine, as were my girls. Just a fright. I didn't blame the fox, it was his nature. I hoped he didn't blame me for braining him with a shovel in retaliation. And then selling his fur, because I'm totally going to do that. And I think you can eat fox. You can, in fact, eat fox. Wouldn't recommend it. Tastes like ass. // Growing rice properly involves a bit more than just chucking your seed into the ground and hoping for the best. I had witnessed the cultivation method of the farmers from the village, and they were a bit lacking. For example, the first thing you do is soak it in a 1/16 ratio of salted water. The rice seed with the greatest amount of endosperm and therefore the best chance of a yield will sink to the bottom of your barrel, while the rest will float to the top. Then, after soaking, you plant the desirable seeds in wide buckets for the first part of their life as they sprout. Then, finally, you transplant them to your paddies. I always found it rather strange that rice does better when you rip it out of the soil and stuff it somewhere else than leaving it be. The funny thing is that I learned most of this from reading Amanda. Thanks, Shizuka. Cheating using techniques from the 1860s when I was in a mid to pre-thousands world, like all true Isekai heroes. Except guns would be pretty much useless, and I had no desire to conquer the world. Rice is more important than that stuff anyways. But enough about that. I was currently on the sprouting stage. The paddies themselves were underway, carved into the side of one of the hills in the terrace style and fed by one of the small rivers, for when it finally came time to flood them. Cultivator's strength and endurance always did turn tasks that should have taken months or years into matters of mere days. Though sometimes I had a sneaking suspicion that my Zen modes lasted for longer than I thought they did. I was always super hungry when they stopped, and occasionally Big D was giving me the gimlet eye when I got back home. Cultivation be whack, yeah. I grunted as I finished examining the terrace wall for any potential defects. It looked pretty good, but just in case, I pushed some more of my chi into it, lending my spirit to help reinforce the wall and strengthen the grass roots to keep everything steady. The masters of the sects would probably have an aneurysm about how much chi I was wasting, but I didn't see it as a waste. It was a resource. If you got it, use it. Besides, it didn't take that long for it to come back. At the start of the next day I was normally feeling fresh as a daisy. Maybe if I was a better cultivator or had bigger reserves, it might take longer, but I didn't know and didn't care. Yawning, I wandered back to my little house, Big D greeting me with his signature screech. "You tell em, Big D." I scratched his head affectionately. His defeat hadn't made him nervous, so that was good. He was still a little bowl of piss and vinegar. My lowly spiritual herbs were growing in their buckets beside my sprouting rice. The spirit herbs needed chi to grow properly, and I figured, why not just juice the rice too? Can't be any harm. I had also repotted the strange root I had found. I couldn't just run off to the archive, so this was the only way I had to store it, and it had some chi to it. So it got a dousing too. I carefully infused my spirit into the water and then picked up my watering can and got to work, with Big D sitting on my shoulder, occasionally hopping off to snap up a bud that dared try to assault my little grow operation. Good boy. More spirit grains for you after dinner. ////////////. And so things went. I had to brain a few more foxes and a starving-looking wolf, but otherwise, things were largely peaceful. Chop wood. Break rock. Plant crop. Nurture with chi. Eat food. Sleep. Months pass. I love it here. The great master had given him the name Bida. He knew not what it meant, but he knew the name was his. He knew it was powerful. But he was not. Awareness was a fickle thing. It came and it went. But he knew during those times. He thought. And he was elevated above those who were beneath him. During the night, his senses were sharper to better alert the great master to interlopers, those of red fur and sharp teeth. But every time he failed in something he knew was his duty, to defend the females, he knew great shame. His great master nurtured him without reservation anyways, treating him like a favored son, and not the shameful thing he was. He was weak. He had to grow in strength and fulfill his destiny. He rode upon the great master's shoulder while he infused their food with his very essence and struck from above upon the base creatures that dared to sup off his powerful essence. He stood the night watch while the great master slept. He guarded the home while the great master completed his great wonders, commanding the land and taming the forest. He watched as the great master moved in the morning, his body flowing with wondrous skill. And so he sought to improve himself. He ran through the great master's lands. He jumped over the hills and onto the giant branches of trees. He shoved his body against the great pots of growth until he could finally move them. And now he stood upon the great pillars of the Fa-Ran, another name with a surely sublime meaning, and gave it his all to imitate the great master, to have some pale imitation of his sublime skill. His body soared through the air. His legs lashed out with strength unknown to his lesser kin. He danced as the great master danced. He did breath as the great master drew breath. Something swelled around him. Within him. I smiled at Big D as he hopped and kicked along my fence. Cute little guy. Chapter 3, Beneath the Crescent Moon. Bida knew fury. One of the red ones had vexed his great master. It had nearly slain one of the great master's flocks, somehow managing to sneak past him. He barely sounded the alarm in time, his voice berating the foul interloper. But this red one, this foul beast, was skilled. It danced around his blows and even, horror of horrors, evaded the great master's mighty spur, the one that he used to tame the earth. In all other cases, his iron spur had been a command of death. With a single contemptuous blow, he smote all others. But not for this one. At first, he was stunned nearly to the point of spitting blood. Why did his great master not pursue? He could have easily slain the interloper, this demon, if he directed his full and terrible wrath against it. He did not understand, but he knew his great master had wisdom that far eclipsed his. Thrice the foul-spawn did attempt to take what was rightfully the great master's. Thrice did the great master's mighty blow miss. He even gave it a name from the very pits of hell, Basi-Brushi. Bida shuddered whenever he heard it. His great master's words of power contained both virtuous and fell wisdom. But now he understood. He had figured out the conundrum his great master had set before him. His great master had once more bored out his mobile coop. He remembered vaguely, before he was enlightened, traveling to these blessed lands upon the mighty fortress from the other place that was more hazy. Some of his master's supplies had run low. He wished to return to the other place so that the people there may give tribute to his glory. But to travel outwards, he would have to leave his home, with only Bida as its guardian. And he was not strong enough. His weakness was preventing the master from living how he wished. It was unacceptable. He had been issued a challenge in Basi-Brushi's continued existence. A mighty task to prove his worth against the wicked. And so he redoubled his efforts. His kicks took on new energy. His dance, new grace. He would slay this mighty enemy and earn his great master's trust. The great pillars of the Fa Ram called. Well, just a bit more till I head back to Verdant Hill. I'd have to take the chickens along with me so they didn't all get eaten. I should probably finally deal with Basil Brush. I was being kind of lazy about it, just chasing him off and hoping he would get the message, but he was becoming persistent. I squinted at Big D as I finished dressing the fox pelt. Was my fucking chicken doing a training montage? I watched his incredibly crisp kicks for a little longer. I shook my head. Nah, I had spent too long alone. Humanizing him a bit too much. Or it's just cultivator world bullshit. All right, tomorrow I'll hunt Basil down. He. Boom boom. Tonight he would slay wicked Basi-Brushi. Tonight it would be either glory or his death. Either were acceptable. If he fell in this battle, it merely proved that he was unworthy of his great master's continued sufferance. He went into the night, hopping from tree to tree in silence. And there he found his quarry. The beast was arrogant. It stalked, but did not realize others could stalk it. In silence, Bida descended, and he struck. His legs lashed with great strength, and his enemy snarled in pain. He struck again to press his advantage, but Basi-Brushi was worthy of his master's ire, the live creature shooting away, but with a deep scar in its flesh that licked blood. Bida saw it in his mortal enemy's eyes. The spark of awareness. The spark of fury. This one knew too. His foe did not run. It knew he had not called his great master. It knew it could lay him low here. The silent dance began. His legs and spurs cut through the night air as he flicked and dashed around his enemy's razor teeth and tearing claws. It tried to strike him with its limbs, to foul his footing and drive him to the earth, but he had grown wise to these beast tricks, dodging them when he could, and accepting the blow to gain distance when he couldn't. The two whirls of red chased each other through the trees, bouncing off trees and leaving scratches in the forest floor. Bida felt triumph. He was equally matched with this one, nay, he dared think himself its superior. Its nose was slashed open, one of its is a ragged mass, his spurs ran crimson. But the wicked one could have tricks too. It raised its limb as to strike another blow, sending his wings snapping out to redirect his momentum. He saw the gleam of satisfaction too late. The paw slant down instead, launching the wicked one forwards, and the vile Basi-Brushi became a streamer of red, trailing behind an open maw. Teeth crashed down upon his wing. The wicked one shook its head savagely and then threw him across the clearing to slam into a tree. It was pain like no other. He nearly cried out, he nearly summoned his great master, but he refused to. This was his test, and he refused to fail. He staggered to get up, his legs shaking with the effort. But it was for naught. Basi-Brushi drove him to the earth with his mighty paw. He laughed over besting the great master's disciple. He savored his victory. Bida knew only shame as he lied there, pinned to the base earth. He could not return his great master's blessings. He could not ever repay him. All he could do is stare up at the night sky in torment. The enormous crescent moon loomed in his vision. It was his favorite phase of the celestial object, and he always contemplated it when it showed its most perfect form. It looked somewhat like his master's mighty spear, or his own useless, weak ones. Ah, how he wished for a mighty weapon to slay the wicked. The crescent moon loomed. Bida, in his last moments, contemplated the lunar glory. Bida, in his last moments, understood. He guided his energy and intent true. Blades of light, pure as the moon above, sprung from his lens. Rising of the crescent moon. His body sprung from its prone position, and he rose as surely as the moon. The wicked could not contain him with its paltry strength. The blade struck true, gouging out one of the foulspawn's eyes as he flicked in the air. The enemy shrieked in pain, its very soul burned by the righteous, heavenly blades he now bore. He hung there a moment under the moon's celestial light, gazing down upon his enemy. All things that rise, fall. Descending lunar fans. It was inevitable, as true as the sun, the moon, and the stars set, so too did he once more descend to the base earth, carrying the weight and glory of heaven with him. Both of his glimmering spurs buried themselves in the neck of the red one. This unsightly Basi-Bushi. Wheel of the crescent moon. His legs split apart, once more throwing him into a flip, the white energy forming a ring-like afterimage around him and parting his mortal enemy's head from its shoulders. He landed gracefully once more upon the earth. His enemies had thumped to the ground behind him. He had done it. Bida had completed his master's task. He roared his victory to the heavens. His great master burst into the clearing upon hearing his cry, fury in his eyes at those who would dare attempt to harm his disciple. // I stumbled to a stop after once again being called out of bed. The small clearing was cut up from something, and there was Big D, looking pleased as punch, standing on the savaged and beheaded form of Basil Brush. What the fuck? His great master, as always, lavished affection upon him. His broken wing was bandaged. His messed feathers combed and his wattles rubbed in a most pleasing way. He was delivered back to the coop and fed full sprigs of heavenly herbs. His great master commanded him to replenish and enjoy himself. He was a good disciple of his great master. He had passed his test and was now to be granted guardianship of the great Fa-Ran, trusted to hold faith for his lord while he braved the world. Start of Volume 4v3c1, settling back into it. If you love your job, you'll never work a day in your life. It was one of the things I heard constantly as I grew up yet could never fully believe. It sounded like an empty platitude, too good to be true. After everything I'd lived through there, I had to admit that, yeah, there was something to it after all. I did, in fact, love my job. Some days it did feel like work. Some days I didn't want to get out of bed. But most days when I got up, I just looked forward to what I was going to accomplish that day. It was probably a bit of a strange thing to think about as I swung my sickle, bending down so I could get at the stalks of the wheat, but it was a thought I couldn't get out of my head. There was something soothing about it, invigorating even. To plant my hands on the earth, to grow, to make, and then to enjoy the fruits of my labor. The year thus far had been trying, one full of upheavals and revelations. Of reconnecting with the cultivation stuff of this world, something that I thought I had left far behind. A letter from the man who had taught me how to cultivate. A massive battle at the dueling peaks, and all the fallout from that I was still waiting for. And yet for as much turmoil the year had brought. As I crouched down with a sickle it all washed away. I just let my body flow as I thought, as I pondered, and as I enjoyed myself. As I moved forwards. The lazy days of summer were slowly but surely coming to a close. I could feel the slight nip of the wind, the change in the plants as they started to change their quiet tune and as the day started to become shorter. And that meant preparations. We had previously harvested all of our rice, but the winter wheat I had planted was fully grown. My chickens trailed in my wake, clucking as they hunted down the insects that had taken up residence in the wheat. We didn't have any pesticides, so the fields were always rife with things looking to steal a portion of my harvest. So we had to resort to older methods. namely unleashing the chickens on them. Are they tasty this year? I asked, amused at the sheer predatory intent the chickens were showing, mercilessly hunting down every bug that dared to move. A voice answered from behind me. Indeed, they are most succulent this year, master. Even better than the last. It was a smooth and deep voice, and I soon turned around to look at the speaker. A rooster stared back at me. He was a magnificent specimen, with fire-red and jade-green feathers, shining with an almost inner light. He wore a magnificent fox fur vest, and his eyes were sharp with intelligence. He finished placing a sheaf of wheat that I had bundled into the basket tied to his back. He looked almost comical, weighed down with the bundle of wheat that was bigger than he was, but he bore the task with ease. Really? I asked him. It wasn't often that an animal could really tell you what they enjoyed eating, but I should have known from the rations Big D had packed when he set off on his journey what he preferred. Smoked worms tasted bad to me, but he had greatly enjoyed them. Indeed, master. This biter has sampled these interlopers from all over the Azure Hills, and yet the ones from our home remain the most succulent. He declared that but authoritatively as he picked up another bundle of wheat. Where did the second best ones come from? I asked, interested. Big D paused at my question, clearly giving my question due consideration. To the southeast, nearer to the Great Lake, there is a glade with a great many worms within. They were most agreeable. The rooster told me, and I chuckled. What makes a good worm, anyway? I asked as I turned back around to continue my job. I would say juiciness for one, yet Brother W.A. she insists it's the snap and correct chew. I would not know, for I cannot chew. And so I listened to a chicken list off the things that one should look for in a good insect as I finished my job. Big D hopped up onto my shoulder as he spoke just like he always did. It was comforting. He would occasionally dart down and grab a bug, just to wax poetic about it. And so it went until I finished the field. Finally I stood and stretched, humming to myself as I yawned. I turned back and looked at the stalks which would need to be plowed back under later. They would be fertilizer for the new growth. It's gotten big, hasn't it? I asked the rooster, the first of my companions in the Azure Hills. Indeed it has. And it shall grow in size next year as well. The rooster returned. A year ago this place was covered in massive boulders and thick trees. It contained but a lonely little shack and the foundation for a single house. The fields had expanded from a little vegetable plot and half an acre of rice to over 30 acres of farmed land. My home was more like a manor, and even the little shack had grown until it was a proper house. So much had changed in so short a time. We even had industry now. I saw the drop hammer we had built down by the river going, the sound muffled by the water and the birdsong. Bowu and Goren were already working on stuff. There was smoke downriver too, the wind blowing away the smell of chemicals as the first tests of our ability to make glass were conducted. The snake was being exceedingly careful, and I definitely didn't want to pollute anything, but it still kind of smelled bad. It was something that I was interested in and I'd be hopefully learning about later, but best to let the master work out some of the kinks first. Honestly, any more things and just a few more folks and my farm would look less like a farm and more like a small village. My auntie certainly wastes no time. Big D observed from my shoulder. Sistian complains that her master runs her ragged in keeping the flames precise. Poor bunny, I chuckled with another shake of my head. I hefted up the bundles of wheat and Big D took some of the others. There was a tune on my lips as we wandered back to the freshly constructed grain storage. The sheer amount of food we were producing necessitated a lot of storage. We passed by another field, one where an ox with a plough beside him rested, watching over 3 sheep and 4 cows. Babe, when you have a moment, could you plough everything in that field under? I called out to the ox. A single eye opened, followed by a slight nod of acknowledgement. He slowly stood, hooking his plough with his horn. The bright yellow piece of equipment was covered in carved suns, and its blade had previously been a demonic sword. But hell, it was a good plough. We continued on our way past the vegetable garden, where a massive, rust-red boar and a dainty pink pig were busy uprooting everything like living bulldozers, being careful to avoid any damage to the produce themselves. Chunky and Pepper then passed the uprooted veggies into a pool of water where a dragon was waiting to receive them. He had fishy eyes and electric blue scales. Washi received the bounty and then did his duty, a swirling orb of water delicately washing all the dirt and insects off them. His beady eyes then examined them closely. His long whiskers danced along their edges as he considered every angle. Then he would place them in 2 different piles. One to be pickled, to be our food for the winter, and one to be eaten soon. The normally gluttonous fish was taking his job extremely seriously. And while I was sure we would have some things missing, I did trust him to make sure we would all be able to last the winter eating good food. If only because if he ate too much now, he wouldn't be able to eat more later. I gave them all a wave as I walked past and got nods in return, Washi chucking me a choice carrot. I split it with BD, snapping it in half and crunching on the sweet vegetable. It was crisp and refreshing. The well-worn parts of the farm took me to the storeroom, where I opened the well-oiled door and started the process of threshing the wheat, something I was pretty good at if I was honest. Super strength and speed made me as fast as any industrial thresher and turned what probably would have been weeks of labor into hours. The only thing I really had to complain about was how hot it got in the compact place. I did have a secret weapon, however. Big D occasionally sent a gust of wind my way with his wings, letting a breeze hit me as well as blowing the dust out of the room. And it was my final chore for the day. I examined the storage halls, which were nearly full to bursting, and scratched at my chin. I wondered daily if I could even sell this around here or if it was like my rice, too high quality to be sold and would have to go to the Azza J Trading Company. It was annoying as hell if I was honest, not being able to sell locally because what you had was too good. It was what it was though. I would just have to figure out a way to deal with it. One problem at a time. I yawned and stretched as I headed back home. I always felt a small surge of pride when I looked at the house I had built. My house was done more in the Japanese style, with a low-hanging roof and enclosed by a veranda that encompassed the entire building. There was a small courtyard out front, flanked by a hut built to store medicine and the bathhouse. It had glass windows and one side had a sliding door that was open, letting the breeze flow through the house. I took a breath, taking in the late summer smells. The air was sweet with the scent of ripening fruit, the trees I had received as a wedding gift having settled in nicely and already were bearing fruit. I inspected the green fruits, pollinated by my bees. The peaches and apples were both already getting big. Everything about the trees popped into my head. How much water they had gotten, their health, and when around the fruits would be ripe. A useful little ability for a farmer. And while I may not have been an American, I was definitely itching for some apple pie. I patted the apple tree I was looking at twice. Big D examined the fruits as well, looking interested at what they would grow into. I turned from the trees and to a beautiful sight in the courtyard. A wonderfully beautiful woman sat at a table in the shade, hunched over and writing something, her brow furrowed. I approached and leaned over the table. "Hey babe, come here often?" I asked as I planted both hands on the table. Mylin glanced up from where she was working. Her amethyst eyes met mine as she was startled out of her introspection before she huffed and laughed. "I just might, Hanson," she returned, smirking up at me. She brushed a lock of green-tinted hair out of her face and I kissed the bridge of her freckled nose. My wife chuckled and leaned back in her chair, stretching. Her shirt rode up just a bit, exposing the bump of her pregnancy. Beside us, Big DHADD hopped off my shoulder and landed on the table in the shade. A tiny rat squeaked her welcome to us, Rizzo putting away her own brush. I walked around the table and started to massage my wife's shoulders as I glanced at the myriad of medical diagrams on the table, as well as one of Mei Ling's own drawings. There was a mass of notes on it, marking out incisions and places of interest. "How's this going, love?" she asked as she groaned, leaning into my touch. "Better, now that I have a solid plan. I still wouldn't dare attempt to do this without the spiritual hodes or your recommendations. The numbing agent is definitely a must, though keeping a person unconscious like that is always a problem," she said with a sigh, looking at the diagram. Owa, who had come into our care, had a mangled leg, one that we were relatively certain we could fix, or at least Mai and her father could probably fix. I'd offer moral support and what little I knew about modern medicine, but at the end of the day I personally couldn't do much about it. "You and Pops have got this. The kill'll be right as rain in no time," I assured her, and she sighed again, but smiled up at me. A hand reached up and she pulled me down. Our lips met. After the Mid-Autumn Festival next week, she muttered. My, how time flies. It seems like it was yesterday when we were visiting the 8th correct place. We'll have to have the little torrent rider over. Your disciple was a very polite young man, Ida, she said, nodding at him. The rooster puffed out with pride at the praise. Zhongfei was a good kid. I could tell why Big D liked him. He should probably leave the dog at home though. I thought Tigua was going to kidnap the fluffy little thing I mused. A cat that loved dogs. Well, stranger things had happened. My wife chuckled and shook her head. Maybe we should buy her one. We don't exactly need a guard dog though, she muttered. We didn't. But I like dogs too, so it was an idea. I had a dogs in the before, a couple of working dogs where I grew up and some pets. It was certainly something to think about. Maybe next year, in spring. My wife yawned and pushed herself away from the table. I think that's enough for today, she said. I helped her collect her papers and carefully put them away. Big D and Rizzo went off together to check on Maetio and Yin while Mai disappeared upstairs. She came back down with her hair in pigtails and wearing the flannel that she had made. I admired the view as she slung a basket across her back. Want to join me? I need to get some mushrooms. I promised Chilan I'd make mushroom stir-fry for dinner tonight. I nodded my head and grabbed another basket. I held out my hand and we departed the house, walking arm in arm. It was a companionable silence as I mused on the past and planned on the future. Things had changed this past year, and all I could do was roll with the punches.